Hello, Vivian Cross. I have been waiting 15 years for this moment. The voice crackled through the radio, like ice shattering against stone, and Vivian felt her blood turn cold in a way that had nothing to do with the frozen wind cutting through her torn dress. She was lying on a rusted water tower platform, her body pressed against metal so cold it burned through the thin fabric of what had once been an elegant crimson evening dress, and there was a rifle in her hands that she had not fired in 8 months. A bullet snapped past her ear close enough that she felt the heat of its passage close enough that she heard the angry whisper of displaced air. 6 inches to the left, and she would have been dead. 6 inches, and the man on the radio would have gotten exactly what he wanted. She had not come here to fight. She had not come here to kill. She had come to visit her twin sister on a 48-hour leave, carrying nothing but civilian clothes and a few paperback novels in her duffel bag, wearing a red dress and black heels because she had come straight from a retirement dinner for a colleague she barely knew. That was 72 hours ago. That was a lifetime ago. Now she was lying in blood-stained silk on a frozen tower in the middle of a war zone, and somewhere out there in the ruins of an abandoned city, a man called the Wraith was hunting her and her sister with the patience of someone who had waited 15 years for revenge. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, the same words he had repeated 1,000 times when she and Victoria were young. There is no such thing as a quiet visit, girls. There is only the one before everything changes. Tonight at Forward Operating Base Delta 7, everything had changed. Victoria's voice cut through the static, sharp and urgent. Tower, I need you on the northeast quadrant. Now. I have got 3 hostiles advancing on the medical tent, and I cannot get an angle. Vivian chambered around, felt the familiar weight of the rifle settle against her shoulder, and remembered how to breathe. 72 hours earlier, she had been a woman who pushed papers and filed reports that nobody read. 72 hours earlier, she had been the twin who walked away, the one who could not handle it anymore, the one who chose a desk over duty. 72 hours earlier, she'd been soft. Not anymore. 72 hours earlier. The military transport plane shuddered through turbulence, and Vivian Cross pressed her forehead against the cold window, watching clouds tear apart beneath the wing. She was the only passenger in a cargo hold designed for equipment and supplies, sitting on a fold-down seat between crates of ammunition and medical supplies, and she was acutely aware of how ridiculous she looked. The red dress had seemed like a good idea that morning. It was elegant without being flashy, form-fitting, in a way that made her feel confident, the kind of dress you wore when you wanted people to notice you had made an effort. She had paired it with black heels that added 3 inches to her height and a cream-colored wool coat that cost more than a month's salary. Her blonde hair was loose around her shoulders, recently styled, still carrying the faint scent of the salon products she had splurged on. She looked like a woman going to a cocktail party. She looked like a woman who had never held a rifle in her life, never learned to calculate windage and elevation, never spent 72 hours motionless in a hide waiting for a single shot. That was the point. Vivian had not worn anything tactical in 32 months, had not fired a weapon except for mandatory qualification tests, had not thought of herself as a soldier since the day she had signed the papers that moved her from active duty to a training position so far behind the lines that the war might as well have been happening on another planet. She looked at her reflection in the dark window and saw a stranger. Manicured nails, subtle makeup, the soft hands of someone who spent their days at a computer instead of in the field. Nothing about the woman in that reflection suggested that she had once held the record for the longest confirmed kill in theater. 2,100 meters a shot that should not have been possible, a target that had needed to die. That was another life, another person. The transport rattled as it began its descent, and through the window, Vivian saw the frozen landscape emerge from the clouds. White everywhere, the kind of relentless white that swallowed everything that made the world look empty and dead. Skeletal buildings rose from the snow like bones from a shallow grave, their windows dark, their walls draped in frost. An abandoned city, a war zone that was supposed to be quiet now. Supposed to be nothing but a monitoring station, supposed to be safe enough that a civilian could visit for 48 hours without paperwork or authorization. Supposed to be. Vivian felt something tighten in her chest as she looked at those ruins, something that felt uncomfortably like recognition. She had never been here before, never seen this city in anything but satellite photographs and intelligence briefings, but she knew it. She had dreamed about it for months now, dreamed about snow and gunfire, and her sister's voice calling for help that never came. That was why she was really here. Not for a visit, not for family reunion. She was here because the dreams would not stop, because something in her gut kept screaming that if she did not come now, she would never see Victoria again. The transport touched down with a bone-jarring impact, and Vivian gathered her coat around her shoulders and prepared to step into the cold. The base materialized through the falling snow like a fortress from another century, all concrete walls and razor wire and guard towers that looked half collapsed, but probably were not. Vivian recognized the architecture of improvisation immediately, the way sandbags had been stacked, where mortar had crumbled. The metal sheets welded over blast damage, the careful positioning of defensive barriers that spoke of experience rather than planning. This was not just a base. It was a statement. We are still here. The cold hit her the moment she stepped off the transport. A physical force that drove the breath from her lungs and made her eyes water. Her heels sank into the packed snow, and she felt ridiculous in a way she had not anticipated, tottering toward the gate like a lost tourist, while soldiers in full tactical gear stared at her with expressions ranging from confusion to outright contempt. The gate guard was young, maybe 22, with the kind of face that had not quite lost its baby fat. His name tag read Sullivan, and he looked at Vivian's civilian ID like it was written in a language he did not speak. Captain Cross is not expecting visitors. Ma'am, this is a restricted military installation. You cannot just... She is my sister, Vivian said. Sullivan's expression shifted. Not softening exactly, but recalibrating the way people always did when they heard the name Cross and put the pieces together. The twin. Vivian had heard that tone before, had seen that flicker of recognition, followed by the inevitable comparison. The Hendricks sisters' people used to say identical in face and different in everything else. Except they were not Hendricks anymore. They had legally changed their name to Cross after their father died. A small act of rebellion against a military that had classified his death and refused to tell them how he had fallen. James Cross, their father, the man who had taught them to shoot before they could drive, who had raised them alone after their mother left, who had died in an operation so secret that his own daughters could not know the truth. Wait here, Sullivan said and disappeared into the guard station. Vivian stood in the falling snow, acutely aware of the eyes on her. A group of soldiers had gathered near the motor pool, making no effort to hide their amusement. One of them, a woman with lieutenant's bars and a hard face, said something that made the others laugh. That is the legendary twin. She looks like she wandered in from a cocktail party. Those heels are not going to last 5 minutes in this weather. Another voicemail equally loud. Heard she's been warming a desk for 3 years. Probably forgot which end of the rifle points forward. Vivian did not turn around, did not react. She had heard worse, much worse from people who should have known better. The mockery of strangers was nothing compared to the voices in her own head, the ones that whispered she had no business being here, that she had walked away from this life and had no right to come back. But she kept her eyes moving, kept her mind cataloging details even as her body stood motionless in the cold. Defensive positions along the northern wall understaffed. Guard towers with sight lines that overlapped in some places and left gaps in others. The motor pool was too close to the fuel depot, a safety violation that would have gotten someone court-martialed in a properly run installation. Old habits. The kind you did not lose just because you had spent 3 years behind a desk. Something felt wrong here. Not just the cold, not just the isolation. There was tension in the air that had nothing to do with her arrival. A watchfulness in the way the soldiers moved that spoke of people expecting violence at any moment. Sullivan returned his face carefully neutral. The captain will see you now. Captain Victoria Cross emerged from the operations building like a soldier expecting contact, her movements quick and economical, her eyes scanning the compound before settling on her sister. She wore fatigues that had been washed so many times the camouflage pattern was fading into something closer to gray. And her blonde hair, the same shade as Vivian's, was pulled back in a regulation bun that made her face look sharper, harder. They were identical, technically. The same gray-green eyes, the same sharp jawline, the same way of standing with their weight slightly forward, always ready to move. But the similarities only made the differences more apparent. Victoria looked like she had aged 10 years in the 32 months since Vivian had last seen her. There were lines around her eyes that had not been there before. A weariness in her posture that no amount of military discipline could hide. She stopped 3 feet away, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two women who had shared a womb, who had learned to walk on the same day. and speak their first words within hours of each other who had fired their first rifles standing side by side in their father's backyard. "You are not supposed to be here," Victoria said. Her voice was flat, professionally neutral, but Vivian could hear the undercurrent of something else. Anger, maybe. Or fear. 48-hour leave, Vivian replied. "I can visit family. This is not a summer camp, Viv. I know what it is." Vivian picked up her duffel bag, the one that held nothing but civilian clothes and paperbacks. Nothing that suggested she had once been one of the deadliest snipers in the military. "I trained half the people who built it." Victoria's jaw tightened, the same tell she had had since childhood, the one that meant she was angry, but knew she could not win this argument. For a long moment, Vivian thought her sister might actually turn her away, might call the transport back and have her removed from the base. Then Victoria's shoulders dropped just slightly, and Vivian knew she had won. 72 hours, Victoria said. Then you are on the next transport out. No exceptions. Understood. They walked through the base in silence, passing soldiers who stopped what they were doing to stare, who whispered to each other with the particular intensity of people sharing rumors. The legend of the Cross twins had grown in the retelling Vivian knew. Two sisters who had enlisted the same week, who had both become snipers through different paths, who had served in different theaters, but somehow always ended up connected by the stories that circulated through the ranks. Victoria's quarters were Spartan in a way that made Vivian's chest ache. A cot that looked barely wide enough for one person. A footlocker with a broken latch. A small desk covered in topographical maps and weather reports, the work of a mind that never stopped calculating threats and responses. And on that desk, a single photograph. The two of them at 16, holding their father's hunting rifles, grinning at the camera like they had just discovered the secret to flying. Vivian picked up the photograph, studied the faces of the girls they had been. So young, so certain that they were invincible. "You have lost weight," she said, putting the photograph back. "Winter rations. Supply convoys have been delayed 3 weeks." Victoria pulled 2 bottles of water from a small cooler, the kind of gesture that passed for hospitality in a place like this. "Command keeps promising reinforcements. We keep adjusting to reality. How many in your unit? 37. Down from 52. Victoria handed her a bottle, her expression carefully blank. "Before you ask, none from action. Medical evacuations. Rotations that never got replaced. One idiot who shot himself cleaning his weapon." Vivian unscrewed the cap slowly, giving herself time to process. A base this understaffed, this far from support, with supply lines that unreliable. It was a disaster waiting to happen. "The city?" she asked, nodding toward the window. "Officially abandoned. Unofficially, we track movement every few days. Scavengers mostly, sometimes scouts. We do not engage unless engaged." Victoria moved to the window, looked out at the falling snow with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had spent too many hours watching empty buildings for signs of life. "Intel says the main hostile forces pulled back 50 kilometers east. This is just a monitoring post now. Quiet sector. You do not believe that?" Victoria was silent for a long moment. Then carefully. "I believe that quiet sectors have a way of becoming loud without warning." The wind picked up outside, rattling the window frame, and Vivian felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Something was coming. She could feel it in her bones, the same instinct that had saved her life a dozen times in the field, the same instinct she had tried to bury under 3 years of paperwork and routine. Something was coming, and neither of them was ready for it. Night fell fast in this part of the world, the pale winter sun dropping below the horizon like it could not wait to escape. Vivian sat on Victoria's cot, her red dress exchanged for borrowed thermal underwear that was 2 sizes too big, and watched her sister pace the small room like a caged animal. They had not spoken about the real issue. They had talked around, it circled. It pretended that the tension between them was just the normal awkwardness of siblings who had not seen each other in too long. But the silence kept growing heavier, and Vivian knew that if she did not break it, they would spend her entire visit pretending everything was fine. "Why have you not called me in 6 months?" Victoria stopped pacing. Her back was to Vivian, her shoulders rigid under her fatigues. "Comms are spotty out here. You know how it is." "I know that is not an answer. I have been busy. Running a base is not exactly a 9-to-5 job." "Vic?" Vivian stood across the room, put herself in her sister's line of sight. "Talk to me, please." Victoria's expression cracked just for a moment, and Vivian saw the hurt underneath. The anger. The betrayal that had been festering for 3 years. "You left," Victoria said, and her voice was raw in a way Vivian had never heard before. "After Mosul, after what happened, you just left. You signed papers and disappeared behind a desk, and you never looked back." Mosul. The word hit Vivian like a physical blow. They had never talked about Mosul. Not really. Never talked about the mission that had gone wrong. The intelligence that had been outdated the 3 members of Vivian's team, who had died because she had trusted information she should not have trusted. I did not walk away. Vivian said, her voice barely above a whisper. I broke. There is a difference. Is there? Because from where I was standing, it looked exactly the same. My sister, my twin, the person I trusted more than anyone in the world, chose a desk over duty, chose to abandon everything we built together because it got hard. The words hung in the air between them, sharp as knives. Vivian felt something hot and painful building behind her eyes, and she blinked hard to keep it from falling. 3 people died, Vic. 3 people who trusted me, who followed my lead, who died because I made the wrong call. Do you know what that does to a person? Do you know what it is like to hear their names in your sleep, to see their faces every time you close your eyes? Victoria's anger wavered. Viv, I did not choose a desk. I chose to stop killing people. I chose to stop putting other people in positions where they might die because of my decisions. And maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe that makes me weak. But it was the only choice I could live with. They stood in silence, the weight of 3 years of unspoken resentment slowly beginning to lift. Victoria looked at her sister, really looked at her, and Vivian saw the moment understanding replaced anger. Then why are you here? Victoria asked softly. Really? Vivian swallowed hard. Because I keep having dreams about this place. About you. Nightmares, where I am sitting behind my desk, reading reports that nobody cares about, and I get a notification that you are dead. That you died in some frozen city I have never seen. And I was not there. I was not there to watch your back. Victoria closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were wet. I am sorry, she said, for blaming you, for not understanding. I am sorry too, for leaving, for not being there. The conversation ended there, unresolved but somehow lighter. The ice had cracked, even if it had not melted completely. Vivian could not sleep. The cot was fine, she had slept on worse, but something in the air felt wrong, like the pressure before a storm that had not yet broken. She found herself dressing in the dark, pulling on the borrowed thermal gear, and moving through the base with the kind of quiet efficiency that she thought she had forgotten. The armory was exactly where she knew it would be, the layout of military bases being predictable in their standardization. The duty officer looked up from his flashlight reading. When she entered, startled, then relaxed when he saw the guest badge on her jacket. Help you, ma'am. Just restless. Mind if I look around? He hesitated, then shrugged. Captain Cross vouched for you, just do not touch anything without asking. The armory smelled like gun oil and metal, a scent that hit Vivian with a wave of nostalgia so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. She had forgotten how much she missed this. The weight of a weapon in her hands. The cold certainty of purpose that came from knowing exactly what you were capable of. She moved between the racks, noting the inventory with a professional eye. Standard issue rifles, a few designated marksman weapons, 3 sniper systems that looked well maintained but old. Her fingers itched to check the scopes to feel the weight of a long gun against her shoulder. That one is mine. Vivian turned. Victoria stood in the doorway wearing a thermal jacket over her fatigues, her expression somewhere between amused and concerned. She moved past Vivian and lifted one of the sniper rifles, a bolt-action system with a suppressor, and a scope that had been modified so many times it barely resembled its original design. Cannot sleep either habit. I do a perimeter check every few hours. Victoria worked the bolt, checked the chamber, then handed the rifle to Vivian. You remember the fundamentals Vivian took? The weapon felt its familiar weight settle into her hands like an extension of her body. The stock had been customized. The trigger pull adjusted, everything about it designed for a specific shooter with specific preferences. Show me, Victoria said. They moved to the range together, an outdoor facility protected by berms and noise baffles. The snow had stopped temporarily, leaving the night crystalline and cold, the stars visible through breaks in the clouds. Victoria set up targets at varying distances, while Vivian familiarized herself with the rifle's characteristics. 300 meters, Victoria called out. Wind from the northwest at 8 knots. Temperature -12. Vivian settled into position. The movements were automatic muscle memory taking over, where conscious thought had long since faded. Her breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped. The scope's reticle found the target, and for the first time in months, the constant noise in her head went silent. There was only the shot. The trigger broke clean. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. 300 meters away, the target sprouted a hole dead center. They worked through distances, through wind calculations, through the mathematics of trajectory and drift that had once been as natural to Vivian as breathing. She felt the rust shake loose, felt the old precision return with each shot. Victoria did not speak, just observed, making small adjustments to her own rifle as she watched. Finally, Victoria stepped to the line beside her sister. One shot, 750 meters. That target cluster at the far berm. They fired simultaneously. 2 impacts close enough to overlap. Victoria lowered her rifle first. "You have still got it." "Different styles," Vivian said. "You always favored speed over patience. Urban warfare teaches you to shoot fast or die slow." Victoria ejected her magazine, began breaking down the weapon for cleaning. You remember the pact Vivian's hand stilled on her own rifle. The pact. The promise they had made as teenagers, lying in a deer blind, with their father waiting for a buck that never came. "If one of us is shooting," Vivian said quietly, "the other is watching her back. Even now, especially now." Back in Victoria's quarters, Vivian studied the tactical maps spread across the desk. Someone had marked them extensively, enemy sight lines in red friendly positions, in blue evacuation routes in green. The work of a mind that never stopped thinking about survival. She noticed something Victoria had missed. Or maybe not missed, but chosen not to acknowledge. "The patrol patterns have changed," Vivian said, pointing to a series of marks near the city ruins. "In the last 72 hours. The scavenger movements have decreased by almost 60%. Victoria looked up from cleaning her rifle. So they found somewhere else to scavenge. Or something scared them off. Vivian traced a line on the map connecting the dots that only made sense if you knew what you were looking for. This is not random, this is a pattern. Like they are avoiding a specific area. Intel says the region is cold. Intel was wrong about Mosul too. The words hung between them and Victoria's hands stopped moving. It was a low blow, and Vivian knew it, but it was also the truth. "Something is coming," Vivian said. "I can feel it." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I know." They sat in silence, two sisters who had spent their lives learning to read danger in the smallest details. Outside, the wind picked up again, howling against the walls like something trying to get in. "Do you remember what Dad used to say?" Vivian asked. "About the enemy you see." Victoria nodded slowly. "The enemy you see is never the one that kills you. He was wrong about a lot of things, but he was right about that." On the map, the abandoned city sprawled across the paper like a corpse, and somewhere in its ruins, Vivian knew with absolute certainty something was watching them. Waiting. 2 kilometers from forward operating base, Delta 7 in the skeleton of a building that had once been a church, a man named Konstantin Volkov stood perfectly still and watched the base through binoculars that cost more than most people made in a year. He had been called the Wraith for so long that he sometimes forgot his real name, forgot the person he had been before the killing started. It did not matter. Names were for people who expected to be remembered, and Volkov had no such illusions. He would be remembered by his work, by the bodies he left behind, by the fear that his reputation inspired in people who had never seen his face. Through the binoculars, he watched a woman in a red dress step off a transport plane and nearly fall in the snow. Blonde hair, elegant coat, completely out of place in a war zone. She looked like a tourist, like a lost civilian who had wandered into the wrong part of the world. She looked exactly like the photograph in his pocket. Vivian Cross. The twin. The one who had walked away from the killing, who had traded her rifle for a desk and her instincts for paperwork. The soft one. Volkov smiled, and the expression pulled at the scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw, a souvenir from a fight he had won 15 years ago against a man named James Cross. James Cross. Colonel. Sniper. The man who had killed Volkov's younger brother during a covert operation that was still classified, still buried in files that would never see the light of day. Volkov had spent 15 years hunting the man who had taken his family from him, only to learn that James Cross had died before Volkov could put a bullet in his head. But James Cross had left behind 2 daughters, 2 twins who had followed in their father's footsteps, who had become snipers in their own right, who carried the Cross bloodline and the Cross legacy. And now, through a combination of patience and money, and a contact inside the military who had been very easy to corrupt, Volkov had both of them in the same place at the same time. The bounty was $3 million per sister. Enough to retire on if Volkov had been the retiring type. But he was not doing this for money. He was doing this for blood. For his brother's ghost, who had haunted his dreams for 15 years. For the closure that came from ending a bloodline, erasing a family the way his family had been erased. He lowered the binoculars and turned to the men waiting behind him. 80 soldiers, professionals, mercenaries who killed for a living and did it well. 6 armored vehicles painted white for winter camouflage. Mortar teams, sniper squads. Everything you needed to overwhelm a base that was undermanned and undersupplied. "We attack at 0347, Volkov said. During the shift change, take out their communications first, then their generator. I want them blind and deaf before they know what is happening." "And the twins," his second-in-command asked. Volkov picked up his rifle, a custom build that had taken 3 years to perfect, and checked the scope with the casual ease of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. "Kill the blonde in the red dress first," he said. "I want the captain to watch her sister die. Then we take our time with her." He looked back through the binoculars, found the window of the quarters where the twins were reuniting, and felt something that might have been anticipation. Tonight, after 15 years, the debt would be paid. Tonight, the Cross bloodline would end. The explosion turned the communications tower into a fountain of sparks and twisted metal, and Vivian was on her feet before the sound had finished echoing across the compound. She had been standing at the window, unable to sleep, watching the snow fall through the darkness, and now she watched the tower collapse in on itself like a building made of cards. The blast wave hit 3 seconds later, rattling the windows, knocking equipment off shelves. Then the second explosion, the backup generator disappearing in a ball of flame, and the lights died across the entire base. Victoria was moving before Vivian could speak, grabbing her rifle and tactical vest with the practiced efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her head. Alarms started screaming. In the barracks, soldiers were shouting, boots hitting floor, the organized chaos of people who had trained for exactly this situation. "Stay inside," Victoria said, already halfway to the door. "Not a chance." Vivian was pulling on her coat over the thermal underwear, her mind already cataloging what she had seen. Coordinated strikes on infrastructure. Communications first, then power. Timed for the shift change when alertness naturally dipped. This was not a probing attack, was not scouts testing defenses. This was a kill shot. They ran into the compound together, into snow that was being churned to mud by running feet and falling debris. Mortar fire began walking across the base, each impact closer than the last, and Vivian felt the ground shake beneath her boots. Soldiers were taking positions along the walls, returning fire at muzzle flashes in the distant ruins, but they were shooting blind, shooting at shadows. Through the chaos, Vivian saw something that made her blood freeze. A figure on a rooftop in the ruins, maybe 600 meters out, wearing white tactical gear that made him almost invisible against the snow. He was standing perfectly still, watching the carnage through what had to be binoculars or a scope. Then he turned and looked directly at her, as if he could feel her eyes on him. Just for a moment. Then he was gone, melting back into the darkness like he had never been there at all. Something about this attack felt personal. The command post had taken a direct hit. Half the structure collapsed, soldiers digging through rubble to reach people trapped inside. Major Walsh was already there, shouting orders, organizing search teams. The kind of calm under-fire leadership that separated good officers from dead ones. Lieutenant Emma Chen, the woman who had mocked Vivian's dress earlier, was pinned behind a sandbag wall, screaming for covering fire. A sniper in the ruins had her position zeroed, and every time she tried to move, bullets chewed the ground around her. Victoria started toward her, but she was too far away, too exposed. The sniper would cut her down before she got halfway. Vivian moved without thinking. She grabbed a rifle from a fallen soldier, a man who would not need it anymore, and dropped to one knee behind the burning remains of a supply truck. The weapon was unfamiliar, the balance wrong, but she had trained on 100 different platforms. It would do. She read the wind, estimated the distance, 400 meters, maybe a little more. Calculated the trajectory in her head, the way she had done 1,000 times before, the math that had become as natural as breathing. One shot. The enemy sniper jerked backward, disappeared from his window, and did not reappear. Emma Chen stared at her, mouth open, eyes wide. "What the hell, you are a civilian?" "I was a civilian," Vivian said, already scanning for new targets. Past tense. Walsh appeared at her shoulder, his granite face somehow even harder in the strobing light of explosions and muzzle flashes. He looked at the rifle in her hands, at the red dress still visible beneath her open coat, at the calm certainty in her eyes. "Jesus Christ, the other twin. I am not active duty, sir. I should not be. Can you shoot?" Vivian met his eyes. "Can you breathe?" For a moment, Walsh just stared at her. Then something shifted in his expression. Something that might have been respect or might have been the desperate pragmatism of a man who would take help from anywhere it came. "Give her ammunition," he shouted to no one in particular. "And God help anyone in her crosshairs." Victoria materialized out of the chaos, her rifle in her hands, blood on her face that might or might not have been hers. The sisters looked at each other, and a conversation happened in that glance that would have taken minutes to speak aloud. "I will take the crane on the east side," Victoria said. "Overwatch position." "The water tower," Vivian replied. 300 meters southeast, outside the perimeter. "You will be cut off. I will be effective." They stared at each other for 3 seconds that felt like hours. 3 seconds to say everything they had not said in 3 years. Everything they might never get the chance to say again. Victoria nodded once, sharp. "Do not die. You neither." They moved in opposite directions into the snow and the gunfire and the chaos of a base that was rapidly becoming a killing ground. Vivian ran low through the snow, using every piece of cover she could find. Burned-out vehicles, fallen walls, supply crates that exploded into splinters as bullets tore through them. The red dress was ruined, now torn and stained with soot and mud, but she barely noticed. She barely noticed anything except the tower ahead of her, and the bullets snapping past her head. The water tower loomed out of the darkness, a skeletal structure of rust and ice that looked like it might collapse at any moment. Vivian hit the ladder at a sprint, climbing hand over hand, while rounds sparked off the metal around her. Her lungs burned. The cold air felt like knives in her chest, but she kept climbing because the alternative was dying. She reached the platform, a circular catwalk with a partial roof that provided minimal protection, and immediately took position. From here, she could see the entire northeastern approach, the ruins of the city spreading out like a cancer. Muzzle flashes blooming in the darkness like deadly flowers. She counted at least 8 sniper positions in the ruins. Professional placement overlapping fields of fire. The kind of setup that took time and planning. This was not a random attack. Someone had spent weeks, maybe months, preparing for this moment. Her first target was in a 4th-floor window, approximately 400 meters out. She settled into her breathing pattern, felt her heartbeat slow, found that quiet space in her mind where nothing existed except the scope and the trigger. She fired. The enemy sniper dropped. Immediately, fire converged on her position. Vivian rolled left as bullets chewed through the catwalk, where she had been lying, metal screaming as rounds punched through the rusted structure. She found new cover behind a support beam, reacquired targets, and kept shooting. This was the old rhythm, the ancient dance, the thing she had tried to forget and never quite managed. She had forgotten how much she missed it. Victoria's voice crackled through the radio, cutting through the static and the gunfire. "Tower, I have eyes on enemy command element. 3rd building from the monument 800 meters northeast. Civilian close, directing fire by radio." Vivian swung her scope toward the building, found the window, the figure half hidden behind concrete. 800 meters in this wind with this rifle. That was a prayer shot. "I cannot make that alone," she transmitted. "Neither can I. Not from this angle." Victoria's voice was tight, the way it always got when she was calculating something difficult. "We fire together. Same target, different vectors. One of us hits." Vivian's breath misted in the cold. This was what their father had taught them, what they had practiced 1,000 times as teenagers. Synchronized fire, overwhelming a single point through coordination. It required perfect timing, perfect trust. "On your mark," Vivian said. She found the target through her scope, compensating mentally for distance wind, the cold affecting powder burn. She would need to aim 2 feet high, maybe a foot right, maybe more. Victoria's voice, "Fire in 3, 2, 1, now." Vivian squeezed the trigger at the exact instant she knew Victoria was squeezing hers. She could not see her sister's bullet 800 meters away, traveling a different path through the frozen air, but she saw both impacts. The enemy commander dropped. The change was immediate. Coordinated fire from the ruins became sporadic, confused. Without direction, the attackers lost cohesion, shooting at shadows instead of targets. "Good shot," Victoria transmitted. "You too." But the battle was not over. Someone new had taken command of the enemy forces, and they were angry. The attack intensified. Mortars walking closer to the center of the compound, machine gun fire from multiple positions, keeping the defenders pinned. This was not about taking the base anymore. This was about killing everyone inside it. Vivian worked through targets with mechanical efficiency, picking them by priority, the way she had been trained. Gunners first, then spotters, then anyone directing troops. Her rifle grew hot despite the cold, empty casings piling at her feet like brass snow. Then her radio crackled with the voice she did not recognize. Male, cultured, ice cold. "Hello, Vivian Cross. I have been waiting 15 years for this moment." She froze. The voice was on their frequency. The enemy had hacked their communications. "Who is this?" "My name is Konstantin Volkov. Perhaps you have heard of me. In certain circles, they call me the Wraith." The name hit Vivian like a physical blow. Everyone in sniper circles knew that name. Volkov was a legend, a ghost story, the kind of killer that other killers told stories about. He had a body count in the hundreds, maybe thousands. And he had never been caught, never been photographed, never been confirmed as anything more than a rumor. "Your father killed my brother 15 years ago," Volkov continued, his voice almost conversational. "A covert operation, classified. Your father put a bullet through my brother's eye from 2,000 meters and never even knew his name. I have spent 15 years tracking that bullet back to its source." Victoria broke in on the frequency. "You are a dead man, Volkov. You just do not know it yet." Volkov laughed, and the sound was worse than the gunfire, worse than the explosions. "The captain speaks. Good. I want you both to understand what is happening here. This attack is not about your base. It is not about territory or resources or any of the things armies normally fight about. This is about you. Both of you. Together." Vivian felt cold spread through her chest. Someone had leaked her travel plans. Someone had told Volkov she would be here. "There is a $3 million bounty on each of you," Volkov said. "But I am not here for money. I am here for blood. Your father took something from me that can never be replaced. Tonight, I'll take it back." Through her scope, Vivian saw him. White tactical suit, silver hair, standing on a rooftop 600 meters away, like he was posing for a photograph. He was looking directly at her position, and even at that distance, she could see that he was smiling. Then he waved, casually, like greeting an old friend. He fired. The bullet hit 6 inches from Vivian's head, showering her with fragments of rusted metal. He could have killed her. At that distance, with his reputation, there was no way he had missed by accident. He had chosen not to kill her. "Not yet. Not yet, Vivian." His voice confirmed through the radio, as if he had read her thoughts. "First, I want you to watch your sister die. Then we play our game." Vivian transmitted to Victoria. "He is hunting us specifically. This whole attack is a trap." "Then let us spring it," Victoria replied. "Our way." Below, the battle continued. But now Vivian understood what she was really fighting. This was not a war. This was a hunt. And she and her sister were the prey. With their commander dead, the mercenaries should have retreated. That was doctrine, that was common sense, that was what any rational force would do when their leadership was decapitated and their coordination collapsed. But these were not rational men, and Volkov had promised them something that mattered more than survival. He had promised them money. $3 million for each Cross sister, dead or alive. And now, with the command structure shattered and the bounty still unclaimed, 80 mercenaries were fighting not for victory, but for payday. Infantry poured from the ruins in waves, accepting casualties that would have broken a normal fighting force, throwing themselves at the perimeter with the kind of desperate fury that only came from greed or fanaticism. Machine gun fire from multiple positions kept the defenders pinned, and mortars walked across the compound with methodical precision, turning buildings into rubble and rubble into graves. Major Walsh was organizing a counterattack, gathering a team near the motor pool for a push toward the nearest enemy position. Vivian watched through her scope and felt her stomach drop. He could not see what she could see from the tower. 3 machine gun nests hidden in the ruins, positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. If Walsh pushed now, his team would walk straight into a kill box. She keyed her radio. "Major, this is Tower. Hold your position. If you push now, you will lose everyone." Static. Then Walsh's voice tight with frustration. "Who the hell is this giving orders? Your best option, sir." "Give me 2 minutes. I will suppress the east position. My sister suppresses the west. You push up the middle on my signal. You are not in my chain of command. With respect, sir, right now I am the only thing between your team and a massacre. 2 minutes. That is all I'm asking." Silence. Vivian could almost hear Walsh calculating, weighing the risk of trusting a civilian against the certainty of what would happen if he did not. 2 minutes, he said finally. "Make them count." Vivian transmitted to Victoria. "Crane, we are running counter-suppression for a push. West side machine gun on my mark." "Copy." "I see it." Vivian found her target through the scope. A PKM machine gun in a blown-out storefront crew of 3, set up smart with good cover and interlocking fire with other positions. Taking out the gunner would not be enough. She needed to make them abandon the position entirely. She fired 3 shots in rapid succession. Gunner, assistant gunner, ammunition bearer, 3 hits, 3 kills. The position went silent. Now she transmitted to Walsh. Below, the counterattack launched. Victoria's rifle barked from the crane, keeping the western position suppressed, with the kind of precision fire that only came from years of practice. Walsh's team moved fast and low, covering 100 meters in under 20 seconds, hitting the enemy position with grenades and close-range fire. The momentum shifted. For the next 30 minutes, Vivian and Victoria became ghosts in the battle. They were everywhere and nowhere, changing the equation with every shot. Every time attackers massed for a push, one of the sisters broke it apart. Every time a defender was pinned, covering fire appeared from an unexpected angle. The enemy could not figure out where they were. They could not predict where the next shot would come from. And slowly, inevitably, their assault began to falter. Victoria saw the movement furthest deep in the ruins, almost invisible, against the snow and the shadows. She swung her scope toward it, adjusted the magnification, and felt her blood run cold. Vehicles. At least 6 of them painted white for winter camouflage positioning behind the cover of a partially collapsed apartment complex. Light armored probably, but enough to punch through the base's defenses like paper. Walsh had 2 rocket launchers and a handful of anti-tank grenades. Against 6 vehicles with infantry support, it would not be enough. "Tower, we have a problem," she transmitted. "They are bringing up armor. Northeast quadrant staging behind the apartment complex." Vivian found them through her scope, watched the vehicles positioning for what had to be a final assault. The lead vehicle, probably the command unit, sat slightly forward of the formation, coordinating the others by radio. "If those vehicles reach the wire, we are dead," Victoria said. "Walsh does not have the firepower to stop them. Can you take the command vehicle?" Victoria did the calculations in her head. 850 meters. Wind gusting to 15 knots, temperature dropping. The target was partially obscured, possibly moving, and she would need to hit something specific enough to disable it. A prayer shot. An impossible shot. "That range is too far in these conditions," Vivian said. "Even for you. It is the only shot that matters." Victoria settled deeper into her position on the crane, letting her body find the stability it needed. The crane swayed slightly in the wind, a constant micro-movement that she had learned to use rather than fight against. She timed her breathing to the sway, finding the brief moments of stillness between gusts. She entered the quiet place, that strange mental space where time seemed to expand and the world narrowed to a single point of focus. The crosshairs found the command vehicle driver's side door. The commander would be inside, coordinating by radio, protected by armor that would not stop a high-caliber round at the right angle. She breathed out slowly, squeezed the trigger. For a fraction of a second, watching the bullets trace through the disturbed air, she thought she had missed. The distance was too great, the wind too variable, the margin for error too small. Then the command vehicle's window spiderwebbed, and the vehicle lurched to a stop. The formation hesitated. That hesitation was everything. Walsh's anti-armor team engaged, taking out the second vehicle with a well-placed rocket. The enemy formation began to scatter, some vehicles trying to push forward anyway. But without coordination, they were picked off individually. The armored assault fell apart before it could begin. But Volkov was not finished. Victoria's rifle clicked empty. She reached for a reload, fingers searching the pouches on her vest, and found nothing. Empty. She had been shooting for over an hour, had lost count of the rounds somewhere around 200, and now she had nothing left. Tower, I am out. Hold position, Vivian transmitted back. I will bring you ammunition. Negative. You are too exposed. The route between us is... But Vivian was already moving. She descended the water tower faster than was safe, her boots slipping on ice-coated rungs, and hit the ground at a run. The supply depot was 100 meters away, across open ground that was being swept by enemy fire. Bullets kicked up snow around her as she sprinted, her lungs burning her legs, screaming, the torn remnants of her red dress streaming behind her like a flag. Victoria watched through her scope, unable to shoot, unable to protect her sister. All she could do was watch as Vivian dodged between burning vehicles and collapsed walls, moving with the kind of desperate speed that came from knowing exactly how close death was. Vivian reached the depot, disappeared inside for 3 heartbeats, and emerged carrying a heavy pack stuffed with magazines. She started back toward the crane, the pack bouncing against her back, her breathing ragged in the cold air. An enemy soldier appeared around a corner, rifle raised maybe 10 meters away. Vivian did not break stride. She dropped the pack, drew her sidearm in one fluid motion, and put 2 rounds center mass before the soldier could fire. He fell. She grabbed the pack again and kept running. Victoria had stopped breathing. Her sister covered the remaining distance in what felt like hours, but was probably 20 seconds, hitting the crane ladder, at a sprint, climbing one-handed, while the other held the pack. She reached the platform, gasping for air, and threw the pack to Victoria. "You are insane," Victoria said. "Probably." Vivian coughed, bent over, hands on her knees. 40 magazines. Make them count. Victoria started loading magazines into her vest, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, even as her mind tried to process what she had just witnessed. Her sister, the one who had walked away from combat, the one who had spent 3 years behind a desk, had just sprinted across a killing field to bring her ammunition. "You should have stayed in cover," Victoria said. Vivian straightened up, picked up her rifle, and took position beside her sister. "Shut up and shoot." The enemy reached the wire. They came with bolt cutters and explosives, tearing through the perimeter, in a dozen places, pouring into the base like water through a broken dam. Hand-to-hand fighting broke out in the compound, the desperate close-quarters violence of men who knew that retreat meant death. Vivian and Victoria worked the field together, 2 rifles moving as one, creating zones of fire that protected the defenders and kill boxes that destroyed the attackers. They did not need to speak anymore. They did not need to coordinate. They were 2 halves of the same mind, thinking the same thoughts, making the same calculations, pulling their triggers at the same moments. Then Volkov made his move. He had been waiting, Vivian realized later. Watching. Letting his men die while he studied the sisters' patterns, learned their rhythms, found the gaps in their coordination. And when he had seen enough, when he had mapped their movements and predicted their responses, he struck. The shot came from nowhere, a single crack that was almost lost in the chaos of the battle. Victoria jerked her body, twisting, and Vivian saw blood spray from her sister's shoulder as she fell from the crane platform. Vic. Victoria caught herself on a support beam, hanging by one arm, her rifle tumbling into the darkness below. She was exposed, vulnerable, a perfect target for anyone with a scope and the skill to use it. Volkov's voice crackled through the radio, calm and satisfied. There she is, the first to die. Through her scope, Vivian found him. 600 meters away, white tactical suit, silver hair, his rifle already trained on Victoria's hanging form. He was taking his time, savoring the moment, knowing that Vivian was watching and wanting her to see. Time slowed. Vivian calculated. 600 meters. Wind shifting. Her sister had maybe 3 seconds before Volkov pulled the trigger. There was no time for a perfect shot. No time for the careful calculations that made the difference between a hit and a miss at this distance. There was only instinct. She did not aim for center mass. At 600 meters with this wind, she could not be certain of hitting his body. But his rifle, the scope he was using to aim at Victoria, that was a larger target in a way that mattered. She fired. The bullet struck Volkov's scope, shattering the optics, throwing off his aim. His shot went wide, missing Victoria by inches, sparking off the metal of the crane. Victoria pulled herself back onto the platform, grabbed a fallen rifle from a dead soldier, and turned toward Volkov's position. Now it was 2 against 1. Volkov realized he had been outplayed. Vivian could see it in the way he moved, the sudden urgency replacing the casual confidence he had displayed all night. He tried to retreat, tried to find cover, but there was nowhere to hide from two snipers who had been shooting together since they were teenagers. Vivian tracked him through her scope. "That was for our father," she whispered. She fired. Volkov staggered, hit in the shoulder, his rifle falling from his hands. Victoria fired. Volkov fell from the rooftop, tumbling through the air, hitting the ground with a sound that carried even over the noise of battle. Around them, the mercenaries saw their leader fall. The man who had promised them millions, the legend who was supposed to be unkillable, lying broken in the snow. The fight went out of them like air from a punctured balloon. Men threw down their weapons, fled into the ruins, disappeared into the darkness. The attack was over. Dawn began to break over the battlefield. Pale light spreading across the snow, revealing the carnage in all its horror. Bodies everywhere, vehicles burning, the base scarred but standing. Vivian lowered her rifle and looked at her sister. Victoria was clutching her wounded shoulder, blood seeping between her fingers, but she was alive. They were both alive. They had won. Vivian descended from the tower on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind an exhaustion so deep it seemed to reach her bones. But there was one more thing she needed to do before she could rest. She walked through the carnage toward the place where Volkov had fallen, stepping over bodies, ignoring the moans of wounded men who would be dealt with soon enough. Victoria fell into step beside her, her wounded arm pressed against her chest, her good hand still holding a pistol. They found him propped against a pile of rubble, his white tactical suit stained red, his silver hair matted with blood. He was still alive, but barely. His breathing was shallow, wet, the sound of a man whose lungs were filling with blood. He looked up as they approached, and incredibly, impossibly, he smiled. "The Cross sisters," he said, and his voice was a ragged whisper. "Your father would be proud." Vivian raised her rifle. "You killed 14 of our people tonight, and you killed 80 of mine." Volkov coughed and blood flecked his lips. "We are the same, you and I. Killers, hunters. We just hunt different prey." "No," Vivian shook her head. "You hunt for revenge. We fight for family. There is a difference." Volkov's ice blue eyes moved to Victoria standing beside her sister. Identical faces looking down at him with identical expressions of cold fury. "Your father, Volkov, said killed my brother with no hesitation, no mercy. A single shot from 2,000 meters and my brother was gone. Just another target. Just another body." "Our father killed a terrorist," Victoria said. "Your brother murdered civilians, women and children. He was a monster, and our father put him down like one." Volkov's smile faded. "History is written by survivors. I thought I would be the one writing this chapter." He looked at Vivian, at the torn red dress, the blonde hair matted with sweat and soot. "You surprised me. The soft one. The one who walked away. I thought you would be easy." "I did not walk away," Vivian said. "I stepped back. There is a difference." Volkov's breathing was getting shallower, his eyes losing focus. "Finish it then. I would rather die by your hand than bleed out in the snow." Vivian's finger tightened on the trigger. Part of her wanted to do it, wanted to put a bullet through the head of the man who had orchestrated this massacre, who had killed 14 of their people and would have killed them all if he could. But Victoria's hand came down on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Let him bleed," Victoria said. "Let him know he failed. Let him die, knowing that everything he planned, everything he spent 15 years building, came to nothing. That is worse than a bullet." Vivian hesitated. Then slowly she lowered her rifle. They turned and walked away, leaving Volkov alone in the snow. Behind them, his breathing slowed, stopped. The Wraith. The legend. The monster who had haunted their family for 15 years died, with his eyes open, staring at a gray sky he would never see again. The sun rose higher over the silent battlefield, and the Cross sisters walked back toward the base together, shoulder to shoulder, alive against all odds. The base looked like a wound in the daylight, craters where mortars had landed, buildings reduced to rubble, bodies being covered with tarps because there was not time yet for body bags. 14 dead, 23 wounded, and a perimeter that would take months to repair. But the flag was still flying. The survivors were still breathing. In war, that counted as victory. Helicopters arrived at 0800, the quick reaction force that should have come 6 hours earlier when communications went dark and the attack began. Better late than useful, Vivian thought bitterly, but she kept the thought to herself. The wounded needed evacuation and recrimination could wait. Colonel David Pierce stepped off the lead helicopter and surveyed the destruction with a face that went pale, then hard. He was career military, old enough to have seen action, but young enough to still be shocked by the reality of it. "What happened here?" he demanded. Major Walsh materialized beside him, his uniform torn and bloody, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Coordinated assault. Approximately 80 hostiles, armor support, full communications blackout. They knew our positions, our patrol schedules, our weaknesses. Someone fed them intelligence. And you held, with 37 soldiers against 80. Walsh turned and pointed toward the crane where Victoria was being treated by a medic, then toward the water tower where Vivian was climbing down the ladder for the last time. 2 snipers, Walsh said. 36 confirmed kills between them. One of them is not even supposed to exist." Pierce watched as the sisters approached, moving with the careful stiffness of people who had been in the same position for too long. Vivian's red dress was destroyed, more whole than fabric stained with blood and soot and mud. Victoria's arm was in a makeshift sling, her face gray with pain and blood loss. But they walked with their heads up their backs, straight, their eyes clear. Pierce turned to Victoria first. "Captain Cross, you are being recommended for commendation. Distinguished service under fire." "Thank you, sir." Pierce turned to Vivian, and his expression shifted to something more complicated. "And you are nobody important, sir. Just visiting family." "Visiting." Pierce's tone made it clear he did not believe a word. "Major Walsh tells me you personally confirmed 19 kills plus supporting actions that prevented multiple friendly casualties. That is not visiting. That is combat." "I was not keeping count, sir." Private Jake Sullivan appeared at Vivian's elbow, his arm in a sling. From the bullet he had taken in the first minutes of the attack. He was the kid from the gate, the one who had checked her ID 3 times and looked at her like she was lost. He was not looking at her that way anymore. "Ma'am," he said, and he saluted with his good arm. "Thank you. You saved my life 3 times tonight." I counted. Lieutenant Emma Chen was standing nearby, the woman who had mocked Vivian's dress and called her a liability. She stepped forward and her face was a study in shame and respect. "I owe you an apology," Chen said. "I thought you were just a tourist playing soldier." "I was wrong." Vivian extended her hand. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is what we do after." Chen took her hand, shook it firmly, and walked away without another word. Walsh brought them coffee, the terrible instant kind that tasted like it had been brewed in a dirty sock, but it was hot, and that was all that mattered. Vivian wrapped her hands around the cup and felt the warmth seep into her frozen fingers like a benediction. "There will be an investigation," Walsh said quietly, standing beside them as they watched the medics work. "You are technically a civilian, Miss Cross. You engaged in combat without authorization, used military weapons in a foreign theater. There will be questions." "I understand, sir. For what it is worth," Walsh said, "I will make sure the record reflects what actually happened. Not the sanitized version, not the politically convenient version. The truth." He walked away to supervise the evacuation, leaving the sisters alone for the first time since the attack began. They sat on ammunition crates, watching the sun climb higher, watching the helicopters come and go. Victoria's shoulder had been bandaged, the wound clean enough that she would not need evacuation, and she held her coffee cup awkwardly in her left hand. "You were right," Victoria said. "About the dreams. About coming here. I was stupid. I almost got us both killed. You saved my life." Victoria turned to look at her sister, and her eyes were wet. "When I fell from the crane, when Volkov had me in his sights, you made a shot that should not have been possible. You saved me." Vivian stared into her coffee. "I could not let you die. Not like that. Not while I was watching." "I blamed you," Victoria said, "for leaving, for Mosul, for walking away from everything we built together. I was wrong. You were not entirely wrong. I did run. I was broken." And now, Vivian looked at her hands, still steady, despite everything they had done in the last 12 hours. "I do not know, maybe still broken, but functional." Victoria reached over with her good arm and squeezed her sister's hand. "That is enough. That is all any of us are." They sat in silence, 2 sisters who had come through fire together, who had remembered what they were capable of when they worked as one. The rift between them was not healed. Not completely, but it was smaller now. Small enough to bridge. "Come back," Victoria said. "Request a transfer. We could train the next generation together." Vivian shook her head. "This is where you are needed. Someone has to hold this line. Then I will come to you." When this deployment ends, we will figure out the rest together. Together, Vivian agreed. Like it was always supposed to be. The pact still holds. Vivian squeezed her sister's hand. Always. If one of us is shooting, the other watches her back. They sat together as the pale winter sun rose higher, two sisters who had faced the worst night of their lives and survived it together. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at Vivian's desk. Inside was a photograph. The base memorial, a simple stone wall with 14 names carved into it. At the bottom in smaller letters were words that made her throat tighten. Defended by all, saved by two. Her phone buzzed. Victoria, they spelled your name wrong, her sister said without preamble. Vivian laughed, the first real laugh she had managed in weeks. I noticed. One less I. I tried to get them to fix it. Stone was already carved. It is fine. I can live with it. Silence. Then Victoria's voice softer. The investigation cleared you. Someone high up decided your skills are being wasted behind a desk. There is a position open at Fort Benning. Advanced instructor. Training the people who go to places like Delta 7. An emergency recall. If another base needs help, they want the option to send you in. A leash that looks like freedom. Vivian understood. Purpose again, but on their terms. The military's way of keeping her close without admitting they needed her. She looked at the photograph, then at the old picture on her desk. Two teenage girls with their father's rifles grinning like they owned the world. Tell them I accept. I knew you would. Victoria paused. Watch your sixth twin. Always watching your back. She hung up and placed both photographs side by side. 14 names on a wall. Two sisters who refused to let them become more. Outside her window, young recruits were training on the range, learning to breathe and aim and squeeze. Someday they would face impossible situations. Someday they would have to hold a line when logic said to run. And when that day came, they would remember what they learned from an instructor with gray-green eyes and a scar she never talked about. An instructor who proved that the deadliest weapon is not a rifle or a drone or an army. It is two sisters who refuse to let each other die. And that is the incredible story of Vivian and Victoria Cross. Two twins who proved that blood is thicker than bullets and that the bonds we forge with family can survive anything, even a night that should have killed them both. You know, it makes you wonder, how many people do we walk past every day without knowing their stories? The quiet woman at the coffee shop, the tired nurse at the hospital, the stranger sitting next to you on the bus. Any one of them could be a hero waiting for their moment. Any one of them could have skills and strength hidden beneath an ordinary surface. Vivian Cross walked into that base wearing a red dress and high heels. The soldiers laughed at her. They called her soft. They thought she was just a tourist playing pretend. But when the bullets started flying, when death came knocking at the door, that same woman in the ruined red dress held the line and saved them all. It is a powerful reminder that we should never judge anyone by how they look. The person you underestimate today might be the one saving your life tomorrow. Now I have a question for you, and I really want you to think about this one. Who is watching your back? Who is that one person in your life who would run across a battlefield for you? Who would make an impossible shot to save you? And here is the harder question. Are you that person for someone else? Would you sprint through gunfire to bring ammunition to someone you love? If you know someone like that, do not wait for a crisis to tell them what they mean to you. Pick up your phone tonight. Send that message. Make that call. Because life is unpredictable, and the people who matter deserve to know it while there is still time. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the bonds that hold us together, then please smash that like button. It really helps the channel more than you know. And if you want more stories like this, stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, then hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with your sister, your brother, your best friend, anyone who has ever watched your back when times got tough. Tag them in the comments. Let them know you are thinking about them. Speaking of comments, drop yours below. Tell me your story. Who is your Victoria? Who is your Vivian? I read every single comment, and I would love to hear from you. Until next time, check your six, trust the people who have earned it, and never forget. Some battles are not won by armies. They are won by sisters.